we pulled in to St. Carlos Bay on the 20th of May under cover of darkness. And on the 21st of May, we were in receipt of the first fighters that came over from mainland Argentine, dropping their bombs on us. 30 days, we were still there every single day, having had bombs dropped on us.
We don't really push the envelope. More like open it. This is Litopia After Dark, the net's first and foremost literary salon. A feast of ideas for your hungry mind. So pull up a chair and let's talk.
I've got so much left to say, but I'll take my words and walk away.
Good evening. Regular listeners will know that from time to time, we like to cover the murky world of espionage. After all, they're interested in you, so why shouldn't you be interested in them? Well, one of our recent shows featured the extraordinary case of FSB agent Alexander Litvinenko, and last year, spy writer Nigel West shared some of his greatest secrets from a career spent talking to men and women who live their lives in the shadows. But tonight, we're breaking new ground as we speak not to a journalist, but to an actual front-line operative. Yes, our guest tonight is a veteran of the Cold War, a veteran of the Falklands War, and believe me, much more besides. He's lived the life of a professional spy, and tonight he's going to spill the beans exclusively on Litopia After Dark.
Gathered from all five corners of the digital globe, from far, from near, from us to you. Tonight on Litopia After Dark.
Welcome to Litopia After Dark, Major David Thorpe. Now, you're speaking from Cheltenham, which is very appropriate, I think, really, because it's the headquarters of GCHQ, the British intelligence agency responsible for providing what's called signals intelligence. Now, tell me, David, and I know we're going back quite a long way, how did you ever get involved in electronic eavesdropping?
Okay, Peter. It all started in 1955 when I enlisted as a boy apprentice at Harrogate Apprentice College, and I was trained in the trade of telegraph operator.
So you came out of this 3 years later, quite a young dude, able to do all those things, plus this special skill, I assume, was in great demand. So where did they send you first?
They sent me to a divisional signal regiment in Germany, by the name of 2 Infantry Division, which in those days the headquarters was in Dusseldorf.
So this would be getting on towards the time when the Cold War started to get quite hot.
Well and truly.
You would be mostly sending communications to other NATO troops about troop movements and stuff like that. Is that right?
Yes, this is our own information, of course, at this stage.
Yeah.
So that lasted 3 or 4 months before I realised that I need more sleep, and that perhaps there wasn't a future in this game. And I volunteered for an Arabic language course.
I'm amazed, David, that you could learn Arabic so quickly. I mean, how do you account for that?
Well, the way you show your accomplishment in those days and to satisfy somebody that you could understand the language was to read an Arabic newspaper.
Right.
Now, the reason behind that is that in the Arabic script, they do not show their vowels. So you need an understanding of the language to be able to put in the vowels where necessary. And as you know, through other languages, if you misplace a vowel, you get the wrong vowel in, the word can have a totally different meaning.
You change roles, though. There's a subtle change going on here, because from somebody who was doing communications from our NATO troops to other NATO troops, you then crossed over, really, and you started listening, didn't you?
Yes.
And that really dragged you into a whole different world, a world of intelligence.
It did. I knew that these organizations existed. And sure enough, on completion of my training, I was then posted to Cyprus, where I had to, before arriving in Cyprus, go to the Intelligence Corps depot, which in those days was located in Maresfield in Sussex. And I had to be rebadged to the Intelligence Corps.
Are you allowed to tell us what sort of target you were listening? You can't. So there's a line there. We can't go over that.
Was it a pizza shop?
Was it
a department store?
Can I, Peter, at this stage, just give a sort of a health warning?
Yeah, sure.
In so much as...
Anybody listening to this show?
You're in a lot of trouble.
You're in trouble.
The Official Secrets Acts state that if you're a member of and work for any of the 3 security services, you are not allowed to reveal anything that you may have learned during your employ.
Right.
I, in order to write my book, put up a case that my book was based on my employment in the capacity of an electronic warfare operator in support of a battlefield commander.
Right.
I was not in the direct employ of any of the national security agencies. And so therefore, I should be treated slightly different. This was agreed to, but I still had to conform to other elements of the Official Secrets Acts and had to wait 30 years for time expiry of a lot of the information that I was privy to.
Blimey.
And my 30 years are now expired, so I am able to speak
Now it can be
about
told.
the electronic warfare operator side of my career, but not that of when I was involved with one of the 3 security agencies.
You know what's on television right now? Well, Litopia is the antidote.
So we move on now, really, don't we, to the next big conflict, at least big in terms of the UK. I know that you Americans, Ian, see this as some sort of weird
Well, this is
colonial war.
Scrabbling over the scraps of empire. What's this,
Exactly.
Argentina?
I know.
Got cheap
That's what,
there or
I know
something.
that's what you lot think. The Falklands, of course. I mean, David, a preventable war.
Very much so. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but when you are aware that, in my case, I knew of a naval chief petty officer who happened to be on the Endurance down in the South Atlantic in the fall of 1981, and as is customary with Royal Naval ships down there, if they happen to go on land, then they meet up with the naval base, the Argentinians or Chileans, whoever it is that they're happen to be alongside. In this case, it was the Argentinians, and they have a game of football. And this particular gentleman had been down there on numerous occasions, and he was well known amongst the Argentinians. So they had the game of football, and at half time, a known Argentinian officer, who was known by the CPO, said to the CPO, "We are going to invade the Falklands.
It's pretty clear.
Will you tell your superiors?" So, fine, thank you very much. He did. He went straight to the captain of Endurance, and the captain of Endurance, in his normal manner, notified certain external authorities, and it would appear that nothing in the way of any interest was taken of that information.
Because John Knott, sorry Ian, but this is kind of great interest actually to British listeners, probably less so to our international ones. But John Knott, who was then the Defence Secretary, I mean, he kind of took the fall for this, didn't he? But do you think that was entirely justified? Do you think it was a bigger failing than just him?
On a personal note, I feel fully justified in the armed forces of this country going to defend fellow citizens because somebody who had no right wanted to take over their possessions. So I have no doubt in my mind that what Margaret Thatcher and the British government did at the end of the day was the only option open. There were certain things, of course, that maybe shouldn't have been done, but this is war and these things happen, and there's no answer to it, I don't think. We are all human beings. We all make mistakes, and unfortunately, we never learn our lessons, as in World War I, World War II, the Falklands, Afghanistan, you name it. It will go on.
So this well-known general comes out during halftime of the football match and says, "We're going to invade the Falklands."
Going to invade the Falklands.
Right.
Yes.
Now, A, had he been drinking? B, was obviously this rules out any element of surprise. And was it taken as a joke? Were they not? Why was that communique that not taken seriously?
I don't know, Ian.
In your opinion, that just sounds crazy.
Yeah, but we are never privy to any of this, you see.
But that wasn't the only evidence, though, was it, David? I mean,
No, there was another.
Yeah, go on.
Another example
Yeah.
of when we were down in the Falklands, obviously communicating back to the mainland and elsewhere within the island, and listening to these communications, we got to know the Argentinians quite well. We were fully aware that a very large element of the Argentinian force were young teenagers, conscripts. Now, in those days, Argentine had a conscript army. For some unknown reason, these conscripts were called up 3 months earlier than their normal enlistment date. Now, I don't believe that the people in the Argentine who were there on our, i.e. the British government's behalf, weren't aware that these soldiers were called up early. And if they're called up early, why are they called up early? They obviously were preparing and planning for something.
How old were they?
Anywhere between 17 and 21.
17.
A lot of them were taken straight from school.
Jeez.
They were called up. They knew, of course, that they would get called up. I mean, this goes without saying. It's the same as in my era. We knew we would do national service. So it doesn't come as any shock. They knew they would be called up. But they were called up earlier. So normally you do it in such a way that you only have one fully trained squad at any one time. Then you've got a few in training. When those in training have become qualified, those that were trained have been discharged. So you've got this regular turnover. But for a period of at least 3 months, we had in the Argentine 2 lots of trained soldiers, which is totally unusual.
Now, were you aware of that by intercepting communications?
No, I was aware of that through other factors, media and this sort of thing, and other stories that have come out
So
since.
it was well known to the Argentine public that there were 2 squadrons that were...
Yes. Also, with it, what I was aware of was that these young lads who had been called up, they were trained. When the time came and they decided to go in against the British on the Falkland Islands, they had brainwashed their young recruits into thinking that they were there in defense of the motherland. And they flew them from their training barracks at night over to the Falklands. These young lads thought that they were actually going to other parts of the Argentine mainland.
I didn't know they were going to the Falklands.
No.
Surely this being surrounded by water must have tipped them off.
No, under cover of night.
You wouldn't know. You wouldn't know what you wouldn't know if you were flying over.
So, but at dawn, surely.
No, not at all. Well, I see no reason because you've got a coastline around the Argentine. They're used to seeing water. So it wouldn't come as any surprise. The climate is the same. Time of day and night is still the same. There's no time change. No. Bearing in mind that they were in isolation. Where their training is, they're virtually in isolation. And where they went to in the Falklands, they were in isolation. They had no contact, majority of them, with the local population.
Sort of reminds me of that Channel 4 spoof show where they told the people they were sending them to space and they just flew them around a 747 to Ipswich.
That's right. Yeah. You can fool some of the people some of the time.
Extraordinary. So you got these boys, really, I mean, 17-year-olds.
And
just boys.
how we were privy to this was that we knew that the Argentinian officers would order the soldiers to write letters to the next of kin, and more or less they drafted for them what should go into those letters to their parents, boyfriends and girlfriends. So there was a form of censorship. We were privy to this.
Now, your role down there was quite important. What exactly do you have responsibility for?
My role was to take a small detachment of linguists and special operators. There were only 7 of us altogether. I had 3 linguists, 3 special operators. These were people who could do the high-speed Morse and the communication side, as opposed to the linguist side. And myself, we were to go down there and give electronic warfare support to the battlefield commander. So we were there to listen into, if we were able, of course, we didn't know at this stage, we were on our way down, listen into the Argentinian field communications that were within reach of the equipments that we had. When we got to the Falkland Islands, we realized then that because of the terrain and the ground, we couldn't get our vehicles off and drive them away from the shoreline. They would have got bogged down in the sand, and that's where we would have remained throughout the war. So the captain of Intrepid kindly gave us permission to stay where we were, and so for 11 weeks, my platform for the intercept was on board a naval vessel.
And how comfortable was that?
How comfortable was that? Well, we pulled in to St. Carlos Bay on the 20th of May, under cover of darkness. And on the 21st of May, we were in receipt of the first fighters that came over from mainland Argentine, dropping their bombs on us. 30 days, we were still there every single day, having had bombs dropped on us. So if you think that's comfortable, sorry, it isn't. Not knowing that these people are out there dropping bombs. And luckily for us, they dropped to the front, to the rear, to the side, but never actually hit us.
Why was that?
A lot of theories have actually been expanded on this, and we came to the conclusion that when the Argentinian pilots came over from the mainland, they were led in a pack by a pack leader who was the only one to be briefed. Consequently, when they arrived over the mainland, the land of the Falkland Islands, the pack leader had to break radio silence and brief the pilots. They didn't know the targets available because they weren't able to get in for their radar and that sort of thing from us, although they did have an observation post on West Island looking down into San Carlos Bay. So the pack would come over, made up of a variety of fighter aircraft. The pack leader would tell them to overfly the targets, pick out a target, let the captain know, let the pack leader know which was going to be their target so they don't have duplication. In flying over the potential targets, they would be met by a very, very high rock face, because San Carlos Bay is like in a pond with high ground all around it. As they approached this high ground, they had to do a very, very sharp U-turn. And they would come back and they would drop their payloads, having told the captain, the pack leader, which was going to be their targets. Now, that's fine. But for some reason, when the brain got onto the ejection for their bombs, their shells, whatever they're going to land on us, there was a fraction of a delay. We believe that this is possibly this old business that I mentioned right from earlier on, where an operator, some of them do not have the ability to coordinate instantaneously what comes in the brain and what comes out of the fingertips. So these pilots, because they had this amount of G-force put or placed on their bodies, there was this fraction of a time where the brain was willing, but the limb wasn't.
But surely they would have learned that lesson after the first failed bombing campaign, and on the second day say, let's narrow our targets down by half and duplicate the targets. Besides, they had the Nazis there training up their pilots from the Blitzkrieg.
No, they didn't change their modes of operation.
They just continued to fly these, to just miss everybody.
Yes.
For the most part, obviously there was.
But you had to put up with this for 30 days.
Yes.
And I mean, you didn't know. I mean, the second day, the third day, the 29th day, the 30th day, somebody could have got lucky, or you could have got very unlucky. I'm just wondering I'm actually trying to work out in my head how that must feel and what sort of stress it puts you under.
What sort of stress? Okay, as I mentioned, we were given this accommodation on board HMS Intrepid. Directly above us was located a Bofors gun, which is there to defend the ship. Now, if you're trying to work and you are aware of shells being ejected from the Bofors gun onto the deck with a sudden loud crashing bang above your head, you know damn well that something is happening out there. Then you hear them drag the boxes of the ammunition across the decks.
What does that sound like?
It's quite deafening, actually, metal on metal, you some idea. And we were in a little room about 8 foot by 8 foot, by which time we had been ordered to hit the deck. This is where, irrespective of what you're doing, you lay flat on the deck, normally on your stomach. The reason being is that if you are unfortunately hit by an explosive device, the shock waves will go down the length of the vessel. And if you are laid on the floor, then the shock waves will follow the contours of your body and the superstructure of the vessel. And they will be passed on down. There's nothing to stop them. If you are in the upright position and stopping these shock waves from coming through, then possibly you'll have your legs blown off. So the thing to do is you hit the deck as soon as possible. So you're in this prone position, you've got shells coming round, you hear all this gunfire and this sort of thing going on. And people have said to me, well, what goes through your mind? Not a lot. I was there to do a job. And I found that initially, when my operators, I normally had 2 on duty at one time, when they hit the deck, because of the shortness of cable from their headset to their receiver, they had to take their headsets off and lay on the floor, which meant they couldn't work. So we managed to get some extra cable. We lengthened the headphones so that when they were laid on the floor, they could actually carry on working. And there's no better substitute for taking your mind off bombing and shelling than to carry on with something that you know that you're good at, and that is carry on working and taking down messages that are coming through. Bearing in mind that these operators, during the course of the daytime, it was virtually constant activity all the time. The radio sets were being used by somebody or other.
What about stress? I mean, you know, that is what stress is made for, isn't it? Life and death situations like that. I mean, surely people must have had horrific symptoms.
Yes, but not obvious at the time. It seems that this is a delayed effect on people. My senior warrant officer, Intelligence Corps, he carried out the work tremendously. I've got nothing but praise for this man. He was absolutely great. But I met him 2 years after the event. We were talking, and he was having nightmares, not sleeping. He thought the end of the world had come. He really did. And he's never got over it.
That's funny.
Even to this day.
Yeah.
This would be classified as post-traumatic stress disorder in today's parlance.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so. But of course, in those days, 30 years ago, post-traumatic stress? No. It didn't exist. Yeah, same as in the Second World War and the First World War. In my case, as I say to people, I don't do stress. But I'm married, I have a family, and my wife would tell you he does do stress. He doesn't realize it himself. But when I came back from the Falklands, my personality and character had changed completely. I didn't know it, but other people saw it in me.
Now, you were involved in 2 controversies that have sort of surfaced since then. One, of course, is the Belgrano, because put your name in Google and Belgrano comes right up there, pops straight up. And the other one is perhaps less well-known, but still very interesting in terms of how much starvation was going on. So tell us about those 2
We
things.
were aware on the starvation front that Argentinians were suffering from lack of food. Obviously, if you have denied a resupply, then what food they've got is going to be very scarce. Unless, of course, you resort to scavenging and you have the sheep and a few other bits and pieces you can find. As a result of this, of course, their soldiers were dying.
They were dying.
Oh, yes. So, we knew of at least 5 who had been buried in the graveyard in Port Howard on West Island.
Wow.
They had actually died from it.
This is how long into the beginning of hostilities?
Well, bearing in mind, they'd been there, the initial party went over under Operation Rosario by the Argentinians, and that was in April the 2nd. And I'm now talking of the end of May, mid-June, by the time we were getting evidence that they were actually dying. When we took the ceasefire, this is another one needs a bit of explanation, I think. The world believes that the Falkland Islands War finished at midnight on the 14th of June. It didn't. It finished on East Island because it was made quite clear to the authorities that General Menendez, who was the commander of the Argentinian land forces, could sign a ceasefire agreement on behalf of all those troops on East Island, where he was located, but he couldn't do the same for the troops on West Island. There would need to be a separate ceasefire. So he signed his on the midnight of the 14th, and then a party on HMS Intrepid, which I was on, we went over to Port Howard, and West Island signed the peace treaty the following day. So there is this anomaly where history will tell you that the war finished on the 14th, when in actual fact it finished on the 15th. Now, we had to take these Argentinian prisoners of war on board HMS Intrepid.
And feed them, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and there were about 2,000 of them that we took on board. And if you looked at these Argentinian troops who were all lined up on the side, I was going to say jetty, it wasn't at the jetty, we couldn't get into the jetty, we were on the side. They came on board, they deposited their weapons, and about every third or fourth man had a 7-pound tin of corned beef. They were the only rations that they had. We were also aware that the ration stores on West Island were being booby-trapped. This was to stop the Argentinian soldiers from breaking into the stores to thieve what little food there was available.
Wow, they booby-trapped their own food against their own people.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yes. So when the end of the war came, television people were there, reporters were there, you name it.
Oh yeah.
A well-known correspondent.
I know who you're talking about. He stood in front of some container, didn't he? And he said,
Yes.
He said, "There's no food problem here at all."
Yeah. And so, of course,
Can we name him? Why shouldn't we name him? Is there a reason?
No, I'd rather you not.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, because he got a sweat, hasn't he? He went in front of the cameras and said, "I'm stood behind this container. What's all this story about? People dying through malnutrition, shortage of food, and this sort of thing." Now, this again, I suppose it's only human nature. Because of his status, his kudos, who he was, the powers that be seemed to take his word rather than mine.
Right.
So it's not my word. I am only reporting what somebody else has said. I never said this. I'm just reporting the product of another conversation to the higher authorities. But they chose to agree with what this other gentleman had said. And I was informed by a good friend and colleague of mine that I had lost some credibility by mentioning they were dying.
Wow.
Well, the interesting thing to come out of that was that in 2010, in Buenos Aires, there was a military tribunal, where 70 officers and men of the Argentinian ground forces were put on charge of causing death by malnutrition, amongst a lot of other things. And they were then sentenced to be courts-martialed.
So you were vindicated on that, weren't you?
Well, the rest of the world doesn't know, because they didn't know about the 70 men that in 2010, 30 years after the event, were actually put on trial.
Yeah.
The last thing the British public remember is that this particular gentleman was stood there and said, "What's all this rubbish about people dying of starvation?"
Yeah. Now, we've got to mention the Belgrano because it's all over the internet with your name. What's your take on that?
The Belgrano.
First off, where were you when
Right.
when the Belgrano was hit and when you intercepted the communique?
Top of my head, I think it was the 12th of May. And at that time, I was miles away from the scene, traveling somewhere on the high seas between Ascension Island and the Falklands. And we had heard through more than one source that the Belgrano had been sunk by a submarine of the British fleet. Fine. The war then proceeded. I had nothing to do with that part of it. I didn't actually get their communications, so it meant very little to me in the overall scenario of my participation in the war. However, at the end of the war, I was asked in 1983 if I would write a report on the sinking of the Belgrano, because at that time, the then Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, was under the impression that there was going to be a ministerial inquiry. And quite rightly, she wanted to get her homework done and be assured that she knew as much about it as the next person. So I was asked to write a report. When I said, "Well, why me?" I was told, "Because you were down there." I said, "Yes, but I had nothing to do with that."
Who asked you, David? Who asked you to write it?
That I'd rather not say.
Okay.
Yeah. Because that falls into the people who work for certain organisations who can't say anything.
Right. Okay.
If you're with me.
Yeah.
So I was asked to write this report, and I was provided with all the necessary potential evidence that I wanted. So I had the Ministry of Defence log, I had the Conqueror, that was the submarine that sunk her, I had her log, all sorts of material.
This is all uncensored.
No, most of this is top secret material.
No, I mean when
But
you
to
received
you,
it.
You saw it uncensored.
You received the uncensored, unedited dance remix.
Yes. Yes. I saw the raw material. Yeah.
Right.
But all highly classified. So I was fortunate that I knew that there must be some indication, because I had, before the Argentinians, just think about how I'm going to word this. Before the Belgrano went down, I was privy that there was a communique sent from the naval headquarters in Ushuaia to all the Argentine naval vessels at sea. And in that communique, they gave a grid reference, which was to be used as a rendezvous point in the event of problems, needing to get out of the way, needing support, you name it. I don't really know how the Argentinian Navy work, but that's what it was for.
This is point RV, standing for rendezvous point.
Rendezvous point,
Okay,
RV.
yeah.
Yep. Now, they sent the coordinates of that RV, and when I plotted them, I noticed that they were inside the then 200-mile restricted zone. So I thought that was strange. The Argentinians must know that we've got a restricted zone 200 miles. They must be aware of where that 200 miles starts and finish. But here we are with an RV point in it. But I thought no more about it because I wasn't involved in it. It was there at the back of my mind. And as you'll know, that after the first day, the Argentinian Navy didn't go to sea. They all went back and they never went out. So that's another story. So now I'm in this position whereby can you investigate the sinking of the Belgrano for the then Prime Minister? Okay.
Yeah.
So I've got all this data and there was absolutely nothing there. And so I started to go through communiques on or around about the date that the Belgrano was sunk. And this is where hindsight is a wonderful thing, because I knew what I was looking for. I was looking for something similar to that original communique, telling them to go to this RV point if they had problems. And sure enough, I found a signal which indicated that the Belgrano was to proceed to this RV point. Now, at the time of the submarine firing its torpedo, the Belgrano, to all intents and purposes, we only got their word for it, was heading in a southerly direction, which appeared to be away from the Falklands.
How far
However,
inside the exclusion zone was the Belgrano when it was hit?
Oh, inside the exclusion zone.
How
Well, it was
far
just-
inside?
I don't know. It was due south of the Falklands. It was well inside. Yeah.
Meters, hundreds of meters?
Oh no, we're talking
Kilometers?
Kilometers, yeah, or nautical miles, yeah.
They didn't just skirt the edge of it because of high
no.
seas. They were fully well in the
Oh yeah, she was well and truly
in the
inside.
box.
Yes, well and truly. Now, when I saw where she was going, yes, she would have to head south and sort of skirt around, but common sense prevails. Would she have gone out of the 200-mile exclusion zone, gone into clear waters, and then come back into the exclusion zone? To me, the answer was no. She would have stayed skirting within the exclusion zone. So she was not leaving it. She was going around to meet her RV point.
But
So had she gone out and come back in, does it matter really? This is semantics. It's,
what was
at the,
the
end of the day,
intent? The intention was to go, as I understand it, I may be wrong, it was to go to the rendezvous point and then from thence onwards back to port, wasn't it?
we don't know.
We don't know that.
That's all speculation, and the Argentine Navy is
Yeah.
what is their line on it today as opposed to then?
Well, we'd have to ask them.
It's a topic I've never, ever got involved in. Yeah. I wrote my report, and that is it. Now, the reason why it was publicized was because after the Falkland Islands War, Margaret Thatcher was on a open TV interview when a retired teacher asked her about the Falklands.
Very famous interview, this. And one of the few occasions, I think, in public, we can tell our listeners that somebody, just an ordinary member of the public, actually got the better of Margaret Thatcher.
She did. And Margaret Thatcher's response was, in 30 years' time, the truth will out. Well, my publication of the book coincided with the 30 years. Unfortunately, the lady who got the better of Margaret Thatcher died towards the end of last year, year before last, if I remember right. But Margaret Thatcher knew that somewhere along the line, the truth would eventually come clear. And I revealed what I knew about it in my book. And,
yes. Is there more to come?
No.
More revelations as far as you're aware?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I don't know how that can be. I mean, the whole issue, really, I mean, it was a very emotional issue at the time. I remember seeing the appalling Sun headline, "Gotcha," which I thought was in the worst possible taste.
I agree.
At the time, they thought 1,000 people had been killed. It turned out to be about 323.
Yes.
It was only the second ship to be sunk in any form of naval action by a submarine since the end of the Second World War, and the very first one to have been sunk in anger by a nuclear-powered submarine. And of course, the whole controversy raged over where was it? Was it going away from the scene of the action? In other words, did we shoot them in the back? And I guess that's something that people will never really agree on.
No, but in my mind, I am fully convinced that it was an act of war, and it could have quite easily been Brits that had gone down on one of their vessels, as opposed to Argentinians who went down on theirs.
Yeah,
it's a bit callous, I must admit. But there again, when you are you are a member of the armed forces, you are there with a purpose, and that purpose is to beat your enemy. And so long as it is reasonably fair and above board, then survival of the fittest will be the order of the day.
What would you say to people who aren't maybe so well versed in the Argentine conflict, and from the outside it seems as if this is fighting over the scraps of empire, and to be callous, that Margaret Thatcher was having trouble at home and was using the Falklands as an excuse to rally everyone around the flag and to her cause. And it did have that. It did successfully bring her back into office and back into the public favor.
Yes,
it was terribly important, actually. I mean, it was absolutely critical in the reinvention of Margaret Thatcher, wasn't it, David?
Yeah, but isn't it the same can be said about the Argentine? Weren't they having problems in the Argentine? And in order to distract the attention from these internal problems, they thought that we'd take them elsewhere.
Pick a fight for the British, who may possibly even give up this.
But it's sort of tit for tat.
Let me just take you back to that dreadful time when you were almost a sitting duck target for 30 days, and somehow nothing managed to land on your head. Let's just imagine that G-forces hadn't been so great one day, and they actually did land a whole series of attacks very successfully, very
Pearl
tragically. Pearl Harbor, basically. The whole course of British political history since then could quite conceivably have changed. Margaret Thatcher could have been deposed. We might have had Neil Kinnock as Prime Minister. I mean, it's feasible, isn't it?
Very. Yes.
It's extraordinary, actually, how on what a tiny little thread history hangs.
Yeah, but the way that our operation was conducted, because we are an all-regular force, once we got into San Carlos Harbor, the majority of our ground fighting force had disembarked the naval vessels, and they were now on terra firma, they were on land. So we were there mainly for resupply, logistics support, and this sort of thing in the bay during that period of time. We did, of course, build a hospital. It was our main logistical headquarters, where our food, our water, our oil, you name it, all arrived. And this if I now tell you another little story of when I lost my credibility, listening to the war, we came to a state after about the 2 weeks of fighting that really it was a foregone conclusion that if we maintained the momentum that we created, eventually the British force would arrive at Stanley. Nearly 10,000 British soldiers on the ground. Now, while all this is going on, I thought, well, I can't do much about that in the way of reporting. We started to look extra carefully at the Argentine setup and how it was distributed, the manpower, and what were they doing. So we then, on one particular net, decided to up this to a priority 1 intercept task. And on this net, slowly, very slowly, over a period of about 10 days, week to 10 days, we built up a picture that there was to be a counterattack on behalf of the Argentinians against the British. How was this counterattack going to happen? Well, I knew from my own intercept resources that on West Island there was about 1,500 Argentinian troops in Port Howard. There were a further 1,500 Argentinian troops down the south in Fox Bay. So you've now got 3,000 Argentinians on West Island. Big problem is, of course, is they've got to cross onto East Island. The majority of the British fighting force is now in the high grounds in and around Stanley. To the rear, we had our hospital, our logistical support headquarters, 4,000 Argentinian prisoners of war, and guarding those 4,000 Argentinian prisoners of war were about 400 Marines. Now, we had picked up this information through the intercept that it was their intention to have a counterattack. And how they would mount this counterattack is they were to fly in 500 airborne troops who would land north of Port Howard. So you've now upped the strength on West Island to the 2 strategic locations, 1,500 in each, that's 3,000 plus 500 you've got in the north. The ones in the south, they were going to cross the Falkland Sound by means of a vessel which the Navy had shelled and thought they had sunk it, but they hadn't. It wasn't seaworthy, but the Argentinians made it seaworthy. And this was quite a large vessel that had been used to take stores and supplies around the Falkland Islands. They had now changed this into a ferry, by which means they would get the 1,500 men down in Fox Bay over to West Island. Those in the north, there were 4 helicopters. They were going to bring those over. So you've now got this situation whereby you've got 3,500 troops on West Island who have the means to get to East Island. On East Island, immediately in their vicinity, is a further 4,000 Marines. So you've now got 7,500 Marines. Who's looking after them? 400 Marines.
Right. Kind of
And then, of
changes
course,
the odds a bit, doesn't it?
yes, they would have taken them out very easily, and then you would have had the 7,500 Argentinians to the rear, sandwiched in between them and Stanley would have been the British fighting force. So all this was going in real time as it happened to build up this scenario of what they anticipated doing. Again, I lost my credibility, and I was told to stop sending this material. Because,
This is shoot the messenger, isn't it?
yeah, it well and truly is.
Wow.
So fine, that was it. But the interesting thing about it was, as I mentioned earlier on, that the war finally came to an end at 0800 on the 15th of June. That was the time, strange enough, that the counterattack was going to take off. But of course, weather conditions, etc., the 500 airborne troops did not arrive, and the war was all over. When we went to West Island to take the ceasefire, we took on board some 2,000 Argentinian troops. And this warrant officer that I mentioned before, the linguist, has said to him, who we got on board, Andy? And he said, I don't know why. I said, well, don't you think we should know who's on board? So he did his best. So I said, all right, I'll go downstairs and find out. He went downstairs. On this ship, the HMS Intrepid, it is a landing platform and dock. It's an assault ship. So you have the means by downstairs in the hold of filling that space with a battalion of troops, 600 men and their vehicles. Give you some idea of the size of the space in the hold of this ship. They got all these prisoners of war in there, the Argentinians, and Andy went down there. He stood on a table, asked for a bit of hush, but here is a man who spoke the language like a native.
Yeah.
He looked like one of them. He'd grown a big droopy moustache. He would have passed one of them, and he spoke the lingo. They straight away respected him, and they listened. And he said to them, right, gentlemen, if there are any officers amongst you, he said, in the British Army, it's customary for an officer to go into the officers' mess, and there he will sign the visitor's book as a matter of courtesy, and then you would be treated to a meal and all this sort of thing. So he said, I'm sorry, he said, for the humble surroundings, but you've got to treat this as your officer's mess. So he said, I've got a book here, would you all come up and sign it? His book was an old exercise book. So, of course, yes, we hear you, yes. No action. But somebody, of course, moved, and that person that moved was the Padre. And he went forward and he said to Andy, what do you want me to do? He said, fill your number, rank and name and appointment in the book. He did it. And before long, there were a queue of officers who were also signing the visitor's book.
Wow.
So he came and brought it to me and said, you want to know who's on board?
There
This
they
is the
are.
people.
Here they are. How clever.
So I went down the list, and lo and behold, there was a name, and his appointment was that he was the regimental records officer. And I said, oh, he should be all right. And he was the records officer of the General O'Higgins Regiment. So I said, who's this guy, Andy? Oh, he said, he's got a lovely Gladstone bag. I said, come off it. I said, you're after his bag, aren't you? He said, well, I wouldn't mind it. So I said, well, what's in it? He said, I don't know. So I said, we'll go and confiscate it. So he went downstairs, got hold of this officer and said, sorry, but I'm confiscating your bag. Well, when he brought it to me, I opened it, and the first thing is there's 2 pistols on there and rounds of ammunition. So it's just, well, we did confiscate it. But then when I'm delving around, I found a piece of paper. This paper was the handwritten notes of this officer who had attended a O group, a meeting, on the action to be taken on the counterattack against the British. It was done, written, of course, handwritten in Spanish, and there were certain key encrypted parts of it. And I looked at this and I said, we've seen this somewhere before. We brought out all our intercept material, and here I was looking at one and the same thing.
Wow.
So all the information that I had been passing to headquarters, this man had in his own handwriting confirmed and verified the whole lot.
Vindication. Vindication.
Well,
Did they say they were sorry?
no.
I don't think
No.
that's a word that's used a lot in the army. But David, this was not the end of your career. It was the end of your involvement with electronic warfare. But you then went on to do a very interesting second career, didn't you?
Yes, all good things must come to an end, and I left my service career at a very high point. I was still enjoying the work I was doing, and so I thought, well, that's the good time to leave, is when you leave and you remember the good things. So what does somebody in my past do? Well, you go and work for the government. Unfortunately, when I made inquiries about government employment, I would have been accepted as an executive officer. That puts me on a par with an A-level student, 18 years old, working for the government. And I said, well, I think I've got a bit more to offer than your average 18-year-old. They said, yes, we will make sure you get rapid promotion. I said, well, put that in writing. Oh, we can't do that.
Don't trust
And
them,
I said,
do you?
no,
It doesn't trust them at all.
And I can't
Well, he's
come and
worked
work
for
you.
them.
Exactly.
So the next option, I thought, where am I going to go? There were lots of options I could have taken, but one that suited me was to be a vetting officer. This is looking into the personal life of people who needed clearance for access to highly classified information.
Is this also known as positive vetting?
known as positive vetting.
Right.
You have
okay.
NV, negative vetting, and positive vetting, PV. Totally miles apart, because your NV, there is, unless specifically required, no face-to-face contact between the individual and those that are carrying out the vetting.
But you did very face-to-face. I mean, you would go and see applicants for very sensitive positions, wouldn't
Yes,
you? And I mean, what would happen then?
Well, on the positive vetting, you have this face-to-face.
Yeah.
So what happens is that somebody is being earmarked as a potential candidate for access, whereby he's going to have access to highly classified information, and therefore he needs to be vetted. So the information would come to me, and I would be in receipt of a questionnaire that individual has filled in. It's listed everything about this guy or lady even, from the day they were born, right the way through to the time of receipt. All the schools they went to from the age of 14, clubs they were members of, work that they might have had, anything unusual that happened in their life, the whole scenario of their life was in front of them.
Yeah.
So that would come. So I would then phone them up and said, I wish to come and interview you. Yes. So we always try to go down to their house or their office environment. A lot of them would want to come and see me at my office. But if you sit in somebody's house, you can pick up all sorts
There's a
of
lot
things.
you. So you're some sort of judgment angel, weren't you? Like the day of judgment, sort of evaluating people, weighing people
The
up.
Dave of judgment.
Yeah.
Dave of judgment. You must have scared people.
Oh, we did. But remember, I spent all my life being vetted. Every 5 years, I had to renew my vetting. So I was well and truly familiar with the organisation.
So what are the points you'd be looking for in somebody?
Well, you had several groups.
And what
You
type
would-
of position are we trying to fill?
All sorts, from very senior posts down to, like I was as a young 18-year-old soldier doing a particular job of work with no experience at all. But you needed it because you needed cover for where you're going into. So yeah, you cover all sorts of people. When one tells you they have been vetted because they wanted to take a school class out on a visit and be a minder or something like that, they use the word vetting. But in my
did you
life,
just light a cigarette, David?
no.
I thought I heard a lighter go just then.
No. Oh, I might have
It
just
was a
not been
fuse.
All right, look,
I don't smoke anymore.
I've got a candidate for you. All right, he's sitting opposite me. His name is Ian Wynn. You've already heard him. He's a very dodgy character. What are you going? What are you going to ask him first?
Right.
I'd love the job, by the way, and I'd be very good at it.
The areas we go into is marital status,
Married, yes, sir.
Right.
and then sexual proclivities.
Yes, I have
Definitely,
those.
yes, I think he has.
Now,
yes.
bearing in mind,
Interesting. That's where you'd first start, is it?
Really, you'd go right just to throw
Go
the
straight in
candidate
there.
off guard.
You don't hang around, do you?
yeah. Oh no, you don't. You don't. You go straight to the jugular.
Wow.
Yeah. Bearing in mind, it's a one-on-one, and you have convinced them that what they say is in the strictest of confidence.
Right.
And I will say this: it is in the strictest of confidence. The data that comes from these interviews is never revealed to any other source, and within the confines of the vetting organisation, it is even limited to small areas of people have access to that particular information. So it is a very safe and secure. The one thing that I try to stress on my customers is that we're all human. We do have little dark areas, grey areas, or whatever it might be in our background. If you tell us you have shared it with us, it is now our responsibility to safeguard you. So if you find that if it's something of a very serious nature and you are being blackmailed, then you can come straight to us, and then we will do our utmost to remove the blackmailer from your past.
Wow.
If you don't tell us, then we can't help you. And if we find out in later time that there is something untoward in your background, the likelihood is that you won't get your vetting. Because if you haven't been truthful on one particular aspect of it, how do we know you haven't been truthful in other areas? I look at these people, I hear what they have got to say, I accept that we all have blemishes in our background. Nobody is perfect in this day and age. But I look at them with the view of, would I accept this man to work for me knowing the baggage that he's coming with. And if I would do this, and as a manager, I'm perfectly willing to accept it, then I would accept him as a candidate for positive vetting.
Interesting. So would a mistress immediately rule someone out, for instance?
Would a mistress rule you out? Yes and no. If we are confronted with that incident where a guy is playing away from home or a lady is playing away from home, we would ask them, does their partner know? We will soon find out if they say yes, because we call the partner in and find out if he knows.
Yeah, that would help.
Yeah. Yeah, she knows. She knows. Just don't say nothing.
She does know now.
And if they say no, they don't know, we say, well, will you go home and tell your partner that you've been playing away from home? And 9 times out of 10, this happens.
Really? They go home. They want the job. They're like, all right, look, honey, this is what's been happening.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Because, without going into it, there are reasons why people do this sort of thing, and and how do we know? Maybe his wife's been, or his husband, her husband is playing the game somewhere else.
Yeah. We're in an open marriage, only she don't know, so don't say nothing.
No. But in this modern world of promiscuity and all the rest of it, it's now getting harder and harder to accept and differentiate between the norm. And I wouldn't like to be a vetting officer now, because when I hear the ways of the lives of the younger generation, at least we had guidelines and parameters. Now life was inside of those. Yes. Nowadays, the name of the game is to get outside of those parameters.
The norm is the norm is widening to be more inclusive.
Yes. Yeah. So I wouldn't like to do that job today.
David, you've clearly got many books inside you. You've written your first one. Tell us what it's called. We've already mentioned, but just repeat the title's name, please, and where we can get it. I'm assuming we can get it from Amazon. Anywhere else?
Waterstones have it. Amazon have it.
Okay.
But it's The Silent Listener.
The Silent Listener. And that's really, for most of your career, that's summed you up, hasn't it?
Yes, where I literally listen in silence. Yeah.
The Silent Listener. I want to say thank you so much for being our special guest on Litopia After Dark tonight. Thank you indeed for giving Ian Wynn's special security clearance as well.
I'm cleared, baby. I'm hired. When do I start? Hey, yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate that. Good practice.
All right. Good night, everybody. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
I've got so much left